Tonight's subject is the Spirit gives life. We are told that God is Spirit. Then we are told that in Him is life, and the life is the light of men. Then we are told, in the book of John, that Andrew found him, went and called his brother Peter, and said, "We have found him, of whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote." Well, who did he find, really? We have found him, the Spirit, who gives life. Well, let me share with you an experience of mine, but bear in mind as I tell you, that if anyone should ever say to you, "Look, here is Christ," or "There he is," do not believe him. Don't believe him, for the simple reason, when you find him, you are like him. Yet, one who has found him can bring you to him. But do not let him point to anyone other than yourself who is the Christ. No matter who he is, how wise he seems to be, how powerful he is, don't believe him. There's no being in the world outside of self that you ever find as Christ. But you will find him. And when you find him, you are just like him. That's the face he wears. Your face raised to the nth degree of beauty and majesty. But your face. So here in him is life. And this life is the light of men. By him all things were made. And without him was not anything made that was made. Not anything, regardless of what it is. 12 years ago, back in New York City, I tasted of the power of the age to come. That power that you and I will share together as one when we're all awake. It's a fantastic power. But since that day, across the country, as I would tell the story of my experience of this power, one question was always asked, and I was unable to answer that question, save from speculation. But they did not wish me to speculate. Did I know from experience? And I did not know from experience. I only knew from experience the positive side of this power. I did not know the negative side. I met no one in my travels who had experienced either the positive or the negative until this past spring in LA. So I will share with you first the positive side, that was my experience, and then the negative side, that was this lady's experience done in LA. As I told you, it was 12 years ago, and I was taken in spirit, and I came upon a scene, a perfectly normal scene just like this, but it was in a New England town, approximately 200 years ago. You see, nothing passes away. That scene was just as alive, although if you had lived 200 years ago, you would have been the only reality, and the past relative to it would not exist, and the future relative to it would not exist. Only it would exist. And today this exists, and we think because it was 200 years ago, it has ceased to be. Well, I know it hasn't ceased to be, because I came upon it. Are these things in any way interfering? Well, I came upon this scene. It was a restaurant. It was an early, I would call it a Sunday afternoon. I felt the atmosphere of Sunday. They were all dining, a very early dinner. There was an enormous bay window looking out upon a pastoral scene. Lovely trees, waving grass, a bird was in flight, and a family of four, two young men in their early 20s, and I take it that the lady and gentleman present were their parents. They were in their early 40s. A waitress was walking towards the table with what I took to be a second course, because they were drinking soup. The young man of about 21 or 22 facing me had brought the spoon almost to his mouth, just about here. As I came in spirit into this place, I knew that if I could arrest within me an activity that I felt, everything within my focus would freeze. No sooner did I know it than I tried it, and I stilled in me an activity that I felt. As I did so, everything froze. The diners dining, dine not. The young man couldn't move the spoon beyond where I had arrested it. The waitress walking, walked not. The bird flying, flew not. The little grass waving, waved not. The leaves falling, which I could see before I arrested it, fell not. And everything froze as though I came into a museum, and these things were suspended by invisible threads. It seemed that way. Then I investigated. And I went close and looked at these people, and they seemed to me dead. They seemed to be not alive. They could have been made of clay. Everything was frozen. And then when I had satisfied myself that they were really dead, or they appeared to be dead, then I released within me an activity which I had frozen. As I released it, everything moved on in its course. The waitress walked. The young man completed the action of taking soup. The bird completed its flight. The leaves began to fall. The little grass began to wave once more, and everything once more became animated. Well, having had that experience, I realized that life was in me, that life was an activity of my own wonderful imagination. Well, the Bible calls it spirit, for he is spirit, and in him is life. Well, I discovered what life really was. I arrested an activity in me, and they were not alive. I released that activity in me, not in them, and they were once more animated. I reanimated the entire sea. I discovered that what we call laws of nature, like gravity, is only, I would say, it's not really an absolute law, because were it an absolute law, the bird in flight should have fallen when arrested. The leaves should have continued. They should not really be suspended in space, but at least the bird in flight would have fallen, but it didn't. And the moment I released it, it continued in its flight to fulfill its purpose. I can see where the waitress would not fall. I can see where the 4 diners could be arrested and yet not in some strange way deny the law of gravity, but not the bird. However, as I saw it, my entire concept of life as I know it changed. So I told that story across the country in the major cities as I visited these cities. One question that is always asked is this: were the 4 diners aware of the fact that they were frozen? Was the waitress aware? Well, I couldn't answer. I didn't know. I only knew, as far as I'm concerned, they were dead. They were frozen, and they seemed not only to be inanimate, but to be devoid of any possibility of ever being animated, until I released it from within me. When I released that activity, which now I know to be life, they once more became alive. Well, this spring in L.A., this couple, they live on the beach down in Malibu, and it's her custom to go walking every day on the sand. And this day in question, as she was walking, looking out to an animated ocean and seeing people on the beach walking, and everyone the normal way of living. And suddenly, and these are her words, she said, "Neville, suddenly, as I'm watching the animated, not an angry ocean, but quite a live ocean, suddenly someone or something turned me off, and I was nothing." These are her words. The ocean was nothing. The people were nothing. Everything was nothing. I stood there aware of being nothing. Then whatever turned me off, or whoever it was that turned me off, turned me on again. And then once more I became someone. And the ocean something, and everything round about me once more became animated and something. Now I can answer that question based upon her experience. I had the positive experience of life in myself, for I arrested it and turned it on again. But I didn't know that when I arrested it, and the 4 diners stopped and were still in their tracks, and the waitress was still, and the bird still, that they had the experience of being nothing. So now I know that that's our future, to actually taste of the powers of the age to come. Then it throws light on the great trial of history. For here is the embodiment of truth, the embodiment of life itself, but keyed low on our level. And he stands before the personification of reason in this world, and reason as to where are you from? And he did not answer. And then Pilate said to him, do you not know that I have the power to release you, or the power to crucify you? He said, you would have no power over me had it not been given to you from above. Therefore, he who delivered me to you, he has the greater sin. That there was no power here whatsoever unless animated from above. That from above spirit animates this entire field of recurrence. And we have our intentions. It could be arrested as this lady done south, and she felt herself to be nothing. And then someone who turned it off, turned it on, and once more she felt she was something. Now here in the book of John, in him was life, and life was the light of men. But the life was in him, and our consciousness is simply the light turned on. When he turns it off, the light is turned off, and we are nothing. Now, it is in him that is life. By him all things are made. Without him, there was not anything made that was made. Well, now I will introduce you to him. And do not look outside of yourself to find him. You're going to find him within yourself. You may not see him. Actually, as I described it last night, telling you the story of Jung, and telling you the story of my own experience when I encountered myself in deep meditation, meditating me, making this thing an animated form that moves across the screen of space. But here, if he makes all things, good, bad, and indifferent, and without him not one thing was ever made, well then let us tell you the story. A gentleman writes me, in 1933, he was sailing down the Danube from Vienna to Budapest. But when he came into Budapest, the lights were on. It was quite late. He was so startled with the sheer beauty of the lights of Budapest that he had an intense longing to always capture them, and promised himself that when he returned to America, he would look all over to find a place that would give him just such a view or something similar. He returned to his home in Missouri, and then moved on to Southern California. And there in the hills of Southern California, there was a view of that fabulous basin when it's all lit up at night, as he described it, like some wonderful lady of the evening with all of her jewelry on. And it simply stunned him. He so loved it. Well, he bought a place with that view, tore out the side and placed an enormous window so he could always see the view. Then, 10 years ago, the one below him planted a huge grove, really, of poplar tree. And he knew, in time, the poplar trees would grow and obscure his view. He knew it. Well, the time came, which is only about a year ago, that the leaves came and the branches came and the view is obscured. In the meanwhile, he started coming to my meetings. He's been coming 2 years now. He said, I will apply this principle of imagining. If imagining creates reality, I will stand here at this window, and with my eyes shut to the obvious, I will see the view that I have seen for years. The view I fell in love with first back in Budapest, and the view I fell in love with here when I first saw it. And for one solid week, he simply saw what formerly he remembered seeing. For I told the story of I Remember When, which was a vision of mine to share with those who would come to my meeting. So having remembered my vision of I Remember When, I think you've heard that vision of mine. And for one solid week daily, he would look and see the sight that he ought to see if the poplar trees were not there. In 1 month, the poplar trees died. Every tree that blocked the sight died. Not all the poplar trees, but every one within view of that actually died. At first it was a shock. Then he said to himself, no, love cannot kill love, and life cannot kill life. Life simply has rearranged itself to conform to the image of my mind. Here he discovered Christ. You say, but Christ wouldn't kill. You must listen carefully to the words. He does everything. I kill, I make alive. I wound. I heal. I create the light. I form the darkness. I do all things. There is no God but God. So if these things died before his very vision, well, then they died. And the man below had, for insurance purposes, to remove the tree. So he removed all the dead trees. Then he said, I had a cat. I loved the cat, and the cat tore all of my lovely rugs apart, and all of my lovely chairs apart. I really loved the cat. I did not get new rugs immediately for the simple reason, Neville, I was hoping that she would die. She was 15 years old, but she seemed to be determined to outlive Methuselah. So here, the cat wouldn't die. He didn't want to kill the cat. He just wanted the cat to be trained. So he imagined the rug in the backyard, which the cat had never used. The cat was 15 years old, and he had that cat for 15 years. That the cat was on the outside, tearing everything apart from that rug. 3 days later, the cat went out and started using the rug instead of the carpets. Until the day she died, it never once came back and tore the rugs. Well, now he has found Christ, because in him is life. He took life from the trees and rearranged them. Here was a cat performing a certain action for 15 years. What a habit formed. And in 3 days that habit could be broken and remain broken until she made her exit from this world. Well, a gentleman in the audience, when I told that story, it never occurred to him to try it. Until that moment when he heard the story. Well, he had a problem similar to the poplar trees, only they were not poplar trees. Seated at his dining room table, he used to feast upon a seed across the balcony. And suddenly, the next door neighbor planted bamboo trees. The bamboos came and blocked off the entire site. He didn't tell his wife or the neighbor what he was doing, but he would physically seat himself at the table and then look off into space and remember what he could see before the trees grew. And he saw it clearly in his mind's eye, and for 1 solid week, that's what he did. But when he came home, beginning of the 2nd week, his wife met him and said, do you know what has happened today? Our neighbor has removed all the bamboos. It was his urge. He thought he initiated the desire to completely change all the backyard and remove all the bamboos. He did not have to go next door to the neighbor and persuade him to do the gracious, decent thing as a neighbor. He didn't tell the wife because she might have done it. He simply sat there quietly and looked, and he saw what he would see if there were no trees there. So here are two. He found Christ. For only Christ can make a thing. Now a third party. He said, I have a little girl, 8 years old. I got thinking, I'm not doing enough for my child. I don't see her enough. I should spend more time with her. That was all that he said to himself. Then he said, I'm very fond of jet flying. So one day, I thought I would enjoy an imaginary flight. I found myself getting ready with my little girl and my wife. We're all getting ready to go off. We would go flying. But strangely enough, as we went through the door, only my little girl seemed to enter my imagination. She had never flown before, so I didn't drive the streets. I found myself right at the airport. I'm explaining to my little girl all the things about an airport. Incoming planes, departing planes, weighing all the baggage and all these things. Then instead of walking up the ramp, I found myself on the plane. I placed my little girl in my imagination at the window. Then I felt the takeoff. And here I am describing to her the things below on the ground. The buildings, the sights, all these things to her, and then I broke it. That was all. A month later, I say to my little girl, Lynn, Lynn, on April the 11th, it is Father's Day and Daughter's Day. Father's, Daughter's Day. So that day, you and I will spend together, just the two of us. What we will do, I don't know. But it said, came the morning of the 11th of April. And my wife is dressing, my little girl is dressing, I'm dressing. But it's just for Lynn and myself. But we went through the door together because my wife had a date with a beautician. And then we parted company, and off I went to my car. I thought, now what will I do with Lynn for the whole day? Well, I will go and have breakfast first. And I'll take her to the beach. And following a lovely time at the beach, I'll take her to lunch. After lunch, I'll take her to the movies. So I got on the San Diego freeway. And there I am tearing down on the freeway when suddenly a feeling possessed me that I could not shake. And that feeling was to get over to the airport and take a jet to San Diego and go to the zoo. I went over to the airport, got on that jet with Lynn. Here I am in the San Diego Zoo. I am almost at the end of my trip when it dawned upon me what I had done in imagination. The very thing I had done, say, 6 weeks before, now comes to fulfillment, and I didn't recognize it when it happened. He found Christ. I hope by these stories, without tasting of the power of the age to come, you will recognize Christ in you. For it is Christ in you that is the hope of glory.